everybody, my name's Aaron. Welcome to the 5 Red Lights.
1 light, 2 lights, 3 lights, 4 lights, 5 lights, and it's go, 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 go!
Welcome along then everybody, this is my Austrian Grand Prix recap, and we're going to kick things off with a 60-second race recap. Max Verstappen led from start to finish from pole position while Lando Norris held off Sergio Perez for second. Esteban Ocon stopped on the opening lap and brought out a safety car. At the restart, Sergio Perez ran off at turn 3 and caused Lando Norris to pick up a 5-second penalty. Hamilton chased and passed the McLaren before damaging his car on the curbs at turn 10 and then had to concede second place to his teammate Bottas and eventually losing third to Lando. Sergio himself picked up 2 5-second penalties after forcing off Charles Leclerc, and Carlos Sainz ran long on the hard tyres, benefiting from those 2 penalties picked up by Sergio. There were points for Perez, Ricciardo, Leclerc, Gasly and Alonso in the top 10, while George Russell came so close to points with 11th place. There was a big last lap contact for Kimi and Seb, which brought out yellow flags. Max's victory now gives him a 32-point lead in the championship. So let's kick off the full race recap with the big talking point, which was the stewards' decisions to award 5-second penalties fairly liberally this afternoon. Now, there was a couple picked up by Yuki Tsunoda which were pretty much bang to rights. That was pretty slam dunk. But the 5-second penalties collected by Sergio Perez and Lando Norris kind of left a lot to be desired about the way the stewards go about what they do, and really let them race. That's what I want to see, and I think that's what a lot of other Formula 1 fans want to see as well. So let's dive in to the Lando and Sergio incident. Now, context is key in any incident, and I think before we jump back to last week and to last year at the same track, we have to recognise that this was at a restart, the opening lap from a safety car restart early in the race, and tyres may have been not fully up to temperature, and Sergio gets a good run on Lando out of turn 3, and Lando fairly defends the inside line, which you'd expect him to do, and Sergio goes round from the outside, and I'm very happy with that, but when you go on the outside, you know that you're putting yourself in a position where the other driver might collect you. If they miss their braking point, if they have a swapper, if they lose the back end. And how often do you see at turn 1 where someone's right on the inside of 3 cars and the bloke on the outside pinches the guy in the middle, not realising there's another car on the inside, and then 3 into 1 doesn't go. Now, obviously here it was just 2 cars side by side and both of them knew what the score was. But I don't think that Sergio was ever really far enough ahead, far enough into the corner to warrant being given the space on the exit. So in that sense, he knew that he was putting himself on the outside and there was a good chance he was going to have to say hello to at least part of the gravel. Now, I think what frustrated me most about the penalty being awarded was the fact that there was no contact. Now, I get that it doesn't always have to be contact for you to have forced someone off the track, but I don't think Lando did this. Now, if you go back and watch the onboards, and I'll try and bring up some pictures of this in the post-edit, Lando's steering position was pretty constant the whole way through the corner. So if you look at where he turns in, he puts the steering angle on for the radius of the corner, and it's one smooth motion. It doesn't start moving around and start flicking, which we'll get onto later on with Sergio. So Sergio, who himself is fighting the car, which seemed to be a bit of a theme through the afternoon, he's trying to wrestle the car around the outside to get himself ahead so that he can pinch the corner. But at some point, you have to accept that because you're on the outside, you're just going to simply run out of room. You're going to run out of circuit, and you have to do the smart thing and regroup and go again. Had he done that, he would have probably passed Lando on one of the next 2 laps. But as it was, he handed the initiative back to Mercedes, who could easily have stormed past Lando and got after Max very quickly on a different day. Obviously that didn't happen, so Sergio kind of got away with that one. And Sergio's race never really recovered. For me, 5 seconds is incredibly harsh. Really, really harsh. Because Lando has done nothing wrong. He's defended his position. He hasn't moved in the braking zone. He hasn't crowded Sergio off the track. And context is everything. It's on the opening lap of a restart. If it was the second lap from the restart, I think you'd have a bit more of a case for awarding a penalty. But come on, let them race. It's the opening lap of a restart. It does beg a belief sometimes. So that was the Lando and Sergio moment. And obviously Lando got the 5-second penalty. Sergio coming off worse, having run off the track and losing 7 or 8 places. Now we move on to the Charles Leclerc and Sergio Perez double incidents, because there was an incident at turn 3, Charles getting a really good traction out of turn 3, sorry, into turn 4. So good traction out of turn 3 from Charles. Got a good run on Sergio, and of course this was behind the battle of Ricciardo and Gasly. So Sergio's trying to attack and also trying to defend. So having got stuck in the dirty air of Ricciardo, obviously it then presents opportunities to Charles. Now Leclerc goes to the outside, and in a similar way to Sergio against Lando, he's wrestling the car around the outside, and of course he knows what the score is. He knows he's probably going to end up running out of room, but further around the corner he's actually got his nose in front. For me, that's how I saw it. And Sergio again seemed to be fighting the car, and there was contact, and Leclerc was forced onto the gravel, lost momentum. Sergio retains the place. Now it's a bit scruffy. It's not what you'd expect to see from a very accustomed performer like Sergio Perez. Very smooth, he's good on the traction, looks after the tyres, he's good at overtakes, doesn't give up the places easily, which is all fair cop. I'm fully on board with that. I thought it was a little bit scruffy from him. He could have done a better job. But for him to then pick up 5 seconds, really? I mean, Charles has a case for having claimed the corner, but really he wasn't that far ahead to claim the corner. So let them race. He's going to catch up again. And again, context. Both drivers in that have lost out because neither one has gained on Ricciardo, who they're both ultimately trying to overtake. Charles, to his credit, composes himself, closes back up the gap, and they have another brilliant scrap through turn 4, and it goes through turn 5 and into turn 6. And again, Charles finds himself on the outside, and it looks like fantastic racing, and it really is. But then, and this is the bit I was saying to you about with Lando. Sergio is a little bit all over the place, and he gets a little bit loose as they exit the corner, and that kind of forces Charles to go wide, which you can understand. Sergio is not in control of what he's doing at that point. He's just fighting the car, and that is what then sends Charles wide. My only gripe with them awarding a 5-second penalty for that is that Charles knew, again, on the outside, the gravel was close, and there was a chance he would end up very close, if not on it. And at that point, at that sort of corner, do you really want to keep hanging it around the outside? And think about it this way: unless you're far enough ahead to be able to keep it on the track, what is the likelihood of making the move through turn 7 and into turn 8? It's very unlikely. You're going to have to run all the way around the outside and then try and run side by side into turn 9. That's a bit scary for me. So really, Charles would have been better off backing out of it unless he'd got himself plenty far enough ahead for Sergio to have to yield the position. But he kept his foot in, brave, and that's what we want to see. But it did cost him. Really, the stewards are to blame for all of that, because they made a rod for their own back, because they set a precedent with Lando and Sergio early in the race that anything that forced another driver off the track was a 5-second penalty, which kind of spoils the race, because Lando could have ended up in second, Sergio would have ended up back in fifth, which would have been a brilliant recovery from where he was, which was ninth, I think, at one point. So we don't need to over-steward Formula One. We don't need to over-regulate it. There needs to be a certain amount of spirit and almost like the gentleman's agreement of qualifying, where you don't overtake in the final sector. And that's something I've got planned for another video, because the Alonso incident was scary. They don't need to keep penalising drivers for racing and racing hard. They are top level performers, and you should only really be penalising them for drastic errors, massive errors. These sort of things, if you see regular wheel-to-wheel contact from one driver to any other driver, I can understand. It's about knowing, like in football with a referee, it's about knowing your players, which ones are going to dive, which ones are going to go in for hard tackles and likely to pick up yellow cards. Which drivers are likely to make wheel-to-wheel contact with others. Max Verstappen went through it, where he had a few wheel bangings with other drivers. Seb Vettel went through it. Many other drivers have gone through it. They don't make these mistakes often, these guys. And if they make a run of them, they generally tend to come out of it. It's frustrating and annoying, and it takes away from what we're actually here to do, which is to race and to enjoy the racing, which is such a shame. And really hope that the FIA in the next few weeks, hopefully over the summer break, have a look at how the stewards police the racing and come up with a more clear picture of what really defines forcing another driver off the track or warrants a 5-second penalty. Because at the moment, something like that could make or break the entire World Championship, which would be such a shame. Such a shame. Sort it out, FIA. Come on. So, moving on from some drivers who had a bit of a scrappy afternoon, not in terms of their general driving, but just in terms of how their race panned out. They were scrapping with other drivers a lot. Two drivers who drove immaculately. And we're going to start with the race winner, of course, Max Verstappen. I'm not a huge fan of Max because I don't always like his attitude. I find it a little bit too strong, but I think that's really a product of the Red Bull Academy. We saw it with Seb Vettel when he was a bit younger, and he's kind of softened as he's got older. And I think as Max gets more mature, that will go away. But today he drove maturely, he drove brilliantly. He was just untouchable. And when you put a driver of his quality in a car of that caliber, and it just works. There was harmony all across the board. And of course we saw that last week, but I think it was a new level today. At no point did you think he's going to fall off the road. He's too comfortable. Obviously there's the famous incident of Senna in Monaco being 40-50 seconds in the lead and throwing it away at Portier, a slam dunk win. And you never see that with Max. It's just, the pressure will come if he's a little bit more racy with somebody else. There can be a few more incidents, but generally at the moment he is absolutely on top form, and he's looking incredibly strong. I would almost say unbeatable. And if he wins at Silverstone in the next race, then it's looking very bleak for Mercedes. And you'd have to think that Max is then favourite for the World Championship, if he's not already. Now my other driver who I want to praise in this section is George Russell, and of course he came so close to that elusive point. Was riding on board with him pretty much the entire race, just to sort of keep an eye on what he was doing. He had a bit of a dodgy start, and he explained afterwards on the TV that Sonoda locking up and swerving in front of him caused him to slow down and lose a couple of places, but it didn't really compromise him because it was cars that would have got past anyway. So the race didn't really change that much for George. It was just the fact that there was cars behind him around him that were doing a two-stop, like the AlphaTauris and the Aston Martins. Gasly got ahead, and what really helped George out was Yuki Tsunoda's double error of judgment at the pit lane entry, picking up 10 seconds worth of penalties, like it's the Formula 1 game. So George had himself in 10th, but then, of course, Fernando Alonso, of all people, to have chasing you with 10 laps to go, and you're desperate for your first point for Williams. It's almost the stuff of nightmares, and I'm screaming at Fernando, please don't do it, please don't do it, and he did it. He passed George, but George's defence ahead of that was absolutely outstanding. Most of it was caught on the live feed, but some of it was not quite caught on the feed as it happened. And in fairness to both drivers, they left each other space, they gave fair respect to their racing etiquette, and Fernando knew that George isn't a driver who's going to start pushing him off the road and forcing him to take unnecessary risks for a single point. And George knew he was racing against Alonso as well, someone who, if you give him an opportunity, is going to make the most of it, but isn't going to do something ludicrous to try and get past you for 10th place. So credit to both of them, and that shows you the maturity and the awareness required to race at this level. Not to say that the others didn't, but you know, they of course they had the space. They had space ahead of them and behind them to afford each other that little bit of extra room, which again feeds into part of what a driver needs to be aware of: the space around him, what's ahead of him, what's in front of him. It's just so sad to see George miss out again on points. He did make it to Q3 though, which was fantastic, and he actually started 8th on the grid after Sebastian Vettel picked up a three-place grid penalty for blocking Alonso. So had Alonso not got that penalty, and not got blocked, George wouldn't have had to battle him, and there's a chance he may have been able to finish in the 10th place that he so desperately wanted. A shame, but Williams are edging so close to those points, and if it's not Silverstone, it could be Hungary, because George qualifies really well. Hungary is a track where qualifying is almost as, if not more important than at Monaco. So Williams, those points are there, they're coming. Just keep going. Just keep going. And George, it is coming. And one day soon, you will be fighting Max Verstappen for race wins in a Mercedes. Hopefully it's next year. But his interview this weekend, left it a little bit open-ended. Yeah, I don't know what you made of that, but I'm not sure he's going to be in a Mercedes next year. But Williams are definitely heading in the right direction. Okay, so let's dive into our driver recap, where I talk about everyone who I've probably not mentioned so much yet. Now, today I'm doing it slightly differently. I'm going to pop it up, and it's going to be completely random. I'm leaving it literally down to OBS to decide which order we review the drivers in. So here we go, let's crack on, and we're going to start with Carlos Sainz, who stealthed his way into a 5th place result. Started 10th after Vettel's penalty, and he started on the hard tyres, dropped down to as low as 13th, but the late pit stop having run longer than anyone else actually, and then he steamed back through on the medium tyres for another superb finish for Ferrari. He's driving so well. Imagine what he could be achieving in the McLaren had he not moved. So he's actually closed the gap to 2 points behind Charles Leclerc in the championship standings. So a really good race for Carlos. And let's talk about the boys at Haas, they finished 18th and 19th, and that's pretty much all there is to say about those boys. Okay, Nikita Mazepin did deliver Gunther Steiner a brand new door, which is about as good as it got for Haas this weekend. Next up is the Iceman, one of them anyway, the Flying Finn, another one of them, Valtteri Bottas, the coffee man, the espresso lover. He finished second, having started 5th on the grid. A difficult day in qualifying, but a better day today in the race. Got the benefit of the team orders because Lewis had some problems, which we'll come on to in a minute. Could he have been used as a blocker? Perhaps not, because Lewis's race was kind of unravelling by the point that he closed in on him. But second place for Valtteri, he'll be very happy with that, about his best performance so far this season. And Lewis Hamilton is up next. Made a good first stint and then picked up some damage to the rear of the car. They're not really sure quite how it happened, going over the curbs at least. And his race kind of unravelled from there. A difficult day for Lewis, and having come so close to snatching victory at Paul Ricard, Austria, the 2 races there have been really tricky for Lewis. He pulled a P2 out of nowhere last week, and this week it just didn't favour him, unfortunately. But it's still a long championship. It is a 32-point deficit. He's overcome deficits larger than that before. And what is it, race 9 of 23? We're not even halfway through yet, so nothing to worry about just yet. P4 in the end for Lewis on a difficult day. Nicholas Latifi ran fairly quietly in the lower midfield and not quite reaching the heights of his teammate George Russell, who was performing spectacularly. But again, another solid performance from Nicholas. Perhaps he could reach a little bit more potential in that Williams, but he's kind of being overshadowed a little bit by George. Antonio Giovinazzi, he finished 14th ahead of Nicholas Latifi. Again, fairly anonymous, ran out of the points for much of the race. He did pick up some damage on the opening lap when he collided with Esteban Ocon, so he had to pit early, and was kind of fortunate to then finish ahead of his teammate. Talking of him, Kimi Raikkonen ran pretty well, went longer, had the fresher tyres towards the end, was closing in on George, and perhaps could have nicked 11th place, but Sebastian Vettel and himself collided on the final lap, which looked quite spectacular when I watched it, but luckily neither driver hit the wall or got hurt, which is really good to see. Fernando Alonso, he kind of gazumped George Russell for that final point in 10th place, but a really good comeback drive from Fernando, who was understandably furious after being blocked in qualifying, which was a kind of terrifying moment. Check out my Instagram and my Twitter. Go through there. I've asked the question: do F1 need to have various formats for qualifying, not based on entertainment, but based on safety? So let me know your thoughts on Twitter or on Instagram. My links are here, there. Moving on to Esteban Ocon in the other Alpine. He lasted all of 3 corners. He was sandwiched by, I think it was Giovinazzi, and I forget who the other driver was. Might have been Schumacher actually on the outside. But another disappointing day for Esteban. Not much else to say. Lando Norris, third podium of the season, second on the grid, and third on the podium, which really, if the stewards had officiated appropriately and with their brains, would have been a second place. And if something had happened to Max, then it could have been a race win. Lando is driving amazing. I'm loving it. Keep it up, Lando. And his teammate Daniel Ricciardo, he had a really good race today, actually. Started 13th, unlucky 13 for some, but it turned out to be a fairly lucky number for Daniel. 7th place on the whole doesn't look brilliant compared to Lando, but where Daniel is with that car at the moment, that's a really solid result and good points for McLaren. He finished ahead of Charles Leclerc, even though he did lose out to Carlos Sainz, who then made the benefit of Sergio Perez's penalties. to nick that 5th place. But improvements coming from Daniel, which is really, really good to see with that 7th place. Pierre Gasly went for the 2-stop and picked up a 9th place, executed it really well, showing that matureness in his driving and the skill that is obviously, and speed is obviously still there. And his teammate Yuki Tsunoda bagged 10 seconds worth of penalties, which kind of cost him a points finish because he finished 12th, and the amount of time he would have lost because he had to pit twice. So you add all that up, and it's just too many places lost, too much time lost. To do it once is silly, but to do it twice is just, it's unforgivable. I know he's small, but I know it might be difficult to see out of these cars, but he can see where the line is, can't he? Everyone else could. No one else made that mistake. That's really poor driving from Yuki. Very disappointed. Aston Martin, Lance Stroll, benefited from the collision of Raikkonen and Vettel, but again finished outside the points. Didn't quite work out for Aston Martin today. Sebastian Vettel had that collision with Kimi, and that kind of summed up Aston Martin's afternoon. And Charles Leclerc, we've spoken about him, but it was a solid drive from him. He was feisty, but ultimately he did get stuck behind Daniel Ricciardo and could not get past. Which brings us back to Carlos Sainz, which is where we started, and that is the driver recap of the Austrian Grand Prix. So there you have it. There's my recap of the Austrian Grand Prix. Thank you so much for joining me. Remember to check out my socials, Twitter at 5_red_lights, and on Instagram 5redlights. Subscribe if you're new to the channel, leave a like if you enjoyed this video, and comment down below what you thought of the stewarding today, whether you thought it was absolute poop or if you thought they got it right, if you feel that they were justified in awarding 5 seconds worth of penalty time to to Sergio and to Lando. Let me know. Again, thanks for watching. That's all for today. My name's Aaron. This has been the 5 Red Lights, and I'll see you when the 5 Red Lights go out in Silverstone.